The transmission arrived simultaneously across every major human network: military command centers, government buildings, corporate satellites, even civilian news feeds. The signal broke through firewalls effortlessly, overriding scheduled broadcasts, freezing holographic advertisements mid-loop, and hijacking global communication systems. Within seconds, every screen, speaker, and display in the solar system played the same message. A figure materialized in the projection, towering and draped in ceremonial war armor made of dark obsidian plates that pulsed with eerie blue veins of energy. His elongated skull bore jagged ridges, and his golden eyes gleamed with cold superiority. The being's voice resonated with the confidence of a conqueror, each word laced with disdain. "I am High Chancellor Vekroth of the Zelvi Dominion," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 victories. "Your world stands at the precipice of history. Submit to the Dominion or be reduced to ashes. You have one planetary cycle to comply." Silence fell across Earth. From the orbital stations to the hidden command bunkers deep within the Arctic, world leaders and military officials watched the broadcast unfold with a grim, calculating stillness. Scientists ran decryption programs, searching for hidden codes or subliminal messaging, but the message was painfully clear. The Zelvari had made their move. Vekroth continued, his voice growing sharper, his presence an unshakable monolith of dominance. "Humanity, you are insignificant. Your species is young, undisciplined, reckless. Your technology is laughably primitive. You are not warriors, but scavengers of dead worlds, parasites leeching from the ruins of greater civilizations. I have conquered empires older than your sun. Do not make the mistake of believing yourselves different. The matters that draw me here in the U.S. are not passing mistakes and lawmaking, or the policy of Congress." The camera angle shifted, revealing a vast fleet behind him. Warships, larger than any structure humanity had ever built, loomed against the backdrop of a distant nebula, their weapons glowing with barely restrained power. The display of force was undeniable. These were not mere raiders or ambitious warlords. They were an empire forged in battle, one that had crushed hundreds of civilizations before humanity had even discovered the fundamentals of space travel. "Resist and your cities will burn," Vekroth continued, his golden eyes narrowing. "Your people will kneel or perish. Your history will be rewritten, your existence reduced to footnotes in the annals of the Dominion. You have one cycle. Choose wisely." Then, just as suddenly as it began, the transmission cut to black. Across Earth and her colonies, reactions varied. In civilian districts, fear took hold. Parents clutched their children tighter, news anchors stammered through half-formed sentences, and conspiracy theorists raved about secret government knowledge of the Dominion's existence. In military circles, the reaction was different. Generals and admirals did not waste time on fear. Data analysts parsed through recordings, tacticians examined the formation of the Zelvari fleet, and cyber specialists scoured the remnants of the transmission for weaknesses. If humanity had learned anything in its violent history, it was that arrogance was a weakness. And Vekroth had plenty of it. Within the United Earth Federation's High Command, a war council was assembled in record time. The room, a circular chamber deep within a classified military installation, pulsed with urgent energy. At the center, a massive holographic display of the Zelvari fleet rotated slowly, highlighting ship classes, estimated weapon capacities, and projected battle scenarios. Fleet Admiral Ethan Caldwell stood at the helm of the discussion. A man who had spent his life in space, Caldwell was not one for theatrics. His hair had turned silver from years of stress. His face bore the hardened lines of someone who had commanded fleets in the deadliest battles of the past century. He had seen planetary sieges, orbital invasions, and massacres that would haunt him until his last breath. But this was something else. He studied the holographic projection with an unreadable expression before finally speaking. "So, They think we're weak. General Sofia Ramirez, head of Earth's ground forces, scoffed. Arrogant bastards. I've seen cocky warlords before, but this one takes the prize. We can assume they've done this before, said Director Li Chen of the Earth Intelligence Agency. They target civilizations they deem lesser, overwhelm them with numbers, and absorb their technology. A standard imperialist strategy. The question is, what makes them so confident this time? Caldwell exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple before nodding toward a junior officer. Play the full broadcast again. I want every word analyzed. As the message repeated, technicians cross-referenced linguistic patterns. Strategists dissected potential weak points in the Zelvery formation, and weapons specialists murmured amongst themselves about countermeasures. The air in the room grew heavier, more charged. Then, a soft chuckle broke the tension. It came from Colonel Isaac Harrington, a man known more for his unorthodox tactics than for military diplomacy. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his lips curled into something between amusement and disdain. Caldwell frowned. Something funny, Colonel? Harrington gestured lazily at the hologram. They're making the same mistake every empire makes when they come knocking. They assume numbers equal victory. They think they've already won because they have more ships, bigger guns, and a fancy title. Hell, I've seen this before, just on a smaller scale. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. And? Harrington's grin widened. And they have no idea who they're dealing with. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Caldwell, a man who had never entertained false hope, slowly smiled. He turned to the communications officer. Send a reply. The officer hesitated. Sir, what should the message be? Caldwell glanced once more at the imposing fleet, at the overconfident warlord who had given them an ultimatum, and then at the men and women around him, each one hardened by humanity's brutal history of war. His answer was simple. Is that all? The response was sent through a direct channel, encoded in a way that ensured it would reach the Zelvery fleet without distortion. The message was short, only 3 words, but it carried an implication that sent ripples through both human and alien ranks. Is that all? The transmission pulsed across the cold void of space, reaching the war bridge of High Chancellor Vekroth's flagship. He stood at the center of the Grand Command chamber, surrounded by a sea of his finest strategists, war tacticians, and fleet commanders. The moment the message arrived, silence gripped the room. No elaborate plea, no desperate surrender, just 3 words, delivered with an air of indifference. Vekroth's golden eyes narrowed as he turned toward his communication officer, a tall Zelvari adorned in ceremonial battle robes. The officer hesitated before replaying the message. The words echoed through the chamber, each syllable biting into the air like a taunt. Vekroth's clawed hand flexed against the armrest of his throne-like command seat. This is their response? His voice was measured, but beneath it a slow, simmering rage brewed. The war tactician standing to his left, a seasoned general with battle scars running across his deep blue exoskeletal plates, tilted his head. It appears so, High Chancellor. They do not beg, they do not negotiate, they mock. A low murmur spread through the chamber. The Zelvari had conquered thousands of worlds. Every species they encountered had either surrendered immediately or struggled futilely before being crushed under the Dominion's might. Never before had a species responded with such audacity. The tension in the chamber thickened as one of the Admiral commanders stepped forward. He lowered his voice as he spoke, his tone laced with cautious curiosity. Perhaps they misunderstand the situation, High Chancellor. Humans are young, arrogant. They do not comprehend the power of the Dominion. Vekroth's golden gaze flicked toward the Admiral. Do you think them fools, Admiral Corvul? The Admiral hesitated. Yes, High Chancellor. They cannot possibly... Then explain why they did not cower, Vekroth interrupted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Explain why, when faced with annihilation, their only response was mockery. No one answered. The silence in the chamber deepened, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Finally, the communications officer cleared his throat. "High Chancellor, orders?" Beckroth exhaled slowly. His rage had not faded, it had sharpened into something colder, more lethal. He rose from his seat, the movement slow, deliberate. Every officer in the chamber stood straighter as his towering form commanded absolute attention. "Prepare the fleet. We move for Earth immediately," he ordered. "Let us educate these humans on the price of defiance." The chamber erupted into motion. Commanders relayed orders to their battalions, officers rushed to their stations, and war strategists began calculating the optimal invasion trajectory. The Dominion had spoken. Humanity's defiance would not go unanswered. On Earth, the response to the Zelvari's movements was immediate. The United Earth Federation's command centers lit up with activity as military analysts tracked the incoming fleet. In the war room deep beneath the reinforced structure of Earth's primary defense headquarters, Fleet Admiral Ethan Caldwell stood before a massive tactical display. The Zelvari fleet's movements were mapped in real time, each ship marked with calculated speed and projected arrival time. At the puzzled expression on Captain Haney's face, the War Minister marked. General Sofia Ramirez stood beside him, arms crossed, her dark eyes scanning the data. They took the bait. Caldwell nodded. "Of course they did. We handed them an insult wrapped in 3 words. Their pride was never going to let them ignore it." Colonel Isaac Harrington, leaning casually against the console, smirked. "So, what's the plan? Do we let them come in nice and close before we remind them why pissing off humanity is a bad idea?" Caldwell exhaled through his nose. "Not yet. We let them feel like they're in control. We let them reach the system. Let them think they have the upper hand. Then we show them what we've been preparing for." A junior officer at the console looked up. "Sir, estimated time until fleet arrival?" 72 hours. Ramirez cracked her knuckles. 72 hours to set the stage? That's more than enough time to make them regret coming here. Caldwell turned back to the display, his expression unreadable. "Let them come," he said. "Let them believe victory is within their grasp." He folded his hands behind his back. "And then we break them." The auxiliary fleet surged into the Sol system like an unstoppable tide, their warships blotting out the light of distant stars as they emerged from hyperspace. The command ship, Dominion's Wrath, led the formation, its hull adorned with the crimson insignia of conquest. On the bridge, High Chancellor Vekaroth watched the planet below through the reinforced viewing screen. Earth rotated silently, a blue-green world that, by all accounts, should have been trembling at the sight of his forces. Yet there was no sign of surrender. No desperate transmissions pleading for mercy. Only a cold, waiting stillness. A lesser species would have begun immediate orbital bombardment. Vekaroth, however, was no fool. He had crushed enough civilizations to recognize when an enemy was too quiet. He turned toward his lead tactician, Admiral Corvul, whose deep blue exoskeleton gleamed under the dim lights of the command bridge. "Scan for anomalies," Vekaroth ordered, his golden eyes narrowing. Corvul inclined his head before issuing the command. The Dominion scanning system swept across the system, gathering data at a speed unmatched by any other empire. Information flooded the tactical display. Energy signatures, planetary defense grids, military installations. And yet, something was wrong. "High Chancellor," Corvul said slowly, his voice carrying a note of unease. "The planet's defense systems are online but inactive. No fleets are mobilized in low orbit. No planetary shield has been raised. They are doing nothing." A ripple of unease passed through the bridge crew. Even the most primitive civilizations deployed their defenses when an enemy fleet arrived. Yet Earth remained still, as if completely unbothered by the armada looming above it. Vekaroth clenched his jaw. They are waiting. The realization settled over him like a cold weight. The humans had provoked his empire, taunted him into bringing his fleet here, and now they simply waited. It was not the behavior of prey. It was the patience of something far more dangerous. His mandibles tightened. Begin the planetary descent. Deploy forward assault divisions to establish a foothold. Corvul hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. At once, High Chancellor. The command was given. Transport carriers detached from the fleet, descending toward the surface in perfect formation. Thousands of war machines followed. Battle walkers, armored divisions, aerial assault units. The Dominion's standard procedure was to crush resistance before it could form. The humans had no planetary shields, no orbital fleets. This should have been a simple conquest. Then, as the first wave of Zelvari forces entered Earth's upper atmosphere, the trap was sprung. A sudden, violent disruption in the electromagnetic field detonated across the planet's magnetosphere. Hundreds of transport carriers flickered as their systems failed, their engines sputtering in an instant of chaos before they careened out of control. Those that survived the initial shockwave found themselves plummeting through an atmosphere suddenly flooded with electronic warfare signals, scrambling their targeting systems. On the ground, hidden beneath the vast landscapes of Earth's continents, the real defense force emerged. Underground launch platforms, previously undetectable, rose from beneath city sectors, concealed artillery turrets activating in a synchronized wave of power. From seemingly abandoned military bases, state-of-the-art kinetic weapons fired into the sky, their projectiles moving at speeds that defied conventional space warfare. In low orbit, Zelvari warships found themselves under fire, not from stationary ground weapons, but from human warships that had remained completely invisible until now. Adaptive stealth plating had kept them hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Now, as the Zelvari formation broke apart in response to the sudden chaos, the human fleet went on the offensive. Inside the Dominion's wrath, Vekroth's fury boiled. "What is happening?" he demanded. Corvul's mandibles clicked in frustration. They knew. They knew we would descend here. The electromagnetic pulse was precisely timed. Their weapon systems were hidden from all scans. They have been preparing for this. A realization struck like a hammer. This was not the desperate resistance of a doomed world. This was preparation. The humans had wanted him to bring his fleet here. A nearby officer turned in panic. "High Chancellor, we are sustaining heavy casualties. Forward units are being destroyed before they reach the ground. Our warships are being targeted with precision strikes. If we do not retreat..." Vekroth slammed a fist onto the control console, silencing the officer. "No, we do not retreat from primitives." He turned to Corvul. "Deploy the second wave. Full bombardment. No mercy." Corvul hesitated. "High Chancellor, the battlefield conditions." Now! The order was carried out. The second wave surged forward, this time with heavier armor, greater firepower, and direct naval support. Plasma bombardment cannons fired from orbit, streaks of energy burning through the upper atmosphere. The Zelvari forces would crush this resistance, no matter how well prepared the humans thought they were. But Earth was not done revealing its surprises. As the bombardment began, massive energy distortions appeared across the planet's surface. Invisible to traditional scanners, a hidden network of countermeasures activated, disrupting the plasma barrages before they could strike. The Zelvari fleet's most devastating weaponry was rendered ineffective, their firepower nullified by a defensive grid that had never been detected. Then the real counterattack began. From Earth's surface, orbital railguns fired. Unlike traditional energy-based weapons, these kinetic slugs moved at relativistic speeds, tearing through Zelvari ships as if they were made of paper. Entire warships were annihilated in seconds, their hulls shredded by impacts that bypassed energy shielding entirely. The human fleet, still hidden in the debris field surrounding the planet, struck like wolves in the dark. Their ships, smaller and more agile, weaved between Zelvari formations, targeting command vessels and relay nodes with pinpoint accuracy. What had begun as an invasion was turning into a massacre, but not the one the Dominion had expected. On the Dominion's wrath, the chaos reached its peak. Vekroth gritted his teeth, his golden eyes wide with fury. The humans had shattered his expectations at every turn. This was not the battle he had envisioned. This was a trap, and he had walked straight into it. Korvul turned toward him, his voice low. "High Chancellor, we must withdraw." Vekaroth's claws flexed. He wanted to deny it, to order a final push, to remind these insolent creatures who ruled the galaxy. But the truth was undeniable. His fleet was collapsing. His forces were being hunted. He exhaled, his rage cold and bitter. "Order the retreat." Korvul didn't hesitate this time. "At once, High Chancellor." The command was given. The remaining Zelvari ships disengaged, their formations broken, their casualties staggering. The once mighty armada that had arrived in Sol System with absolute confidence now limped away, barely escaping the slaughter. As Earth's forces ceased fire, allowing the retreating invaders to flee, a single transmission was sent to the surviving Zelvari fleet. "Is that all?" Vekaroth stared at the words on the screen, his claws digging into the armrest of his throne. For the first time in his long, victorious reign, he felt fear. The Dominion's wrath drifted in the silence of deep space, its once pristine hull scarred and fractured from the disastrous battle. The great Zelvari warship, meant to be a symbol of fear and dominance, now carried only the echoes of defeat. Inside, the War Council chamber remained dimly lit, the atmosphere thick with unspoken tension. Vekaroth sat in his throne-like command seat, his golden eyes locked onto the fleet report scrolling before him. He did not move, did not speak, but the weight of the defeat hung over him like a vice. His fleet had been shattered, his forces had been outmaneuvered, and, worst of all, his enemy had made no effort to chase him down. That final message, still glowing on the main display, burned into his mind like a brand. Is that all? It was not a question, it was a statement, a challenge, a declaration that the humans had not even needed to try their hardest. He clenched his jaw, his claws tapping rhythmically against the metal of his armrest. The humans had done something no species had ever managed. They had forced the Dominion into retreat, and they had done it with a level of strategy that defied all logic. And Korvul stood to his right, his posture rigid with controlled frustration. "High Chancellor," he began, his voice measured, "our analysts have completed the tactical assessment of the battle. The loss calculations are unprecedented." Vekaroth turned his head slightly, his gaze sharpening. "Explain." Korvul's mandibles tightened. The human fleet sustained minimal losses. Their countermeasures were not improvised defenses, but premeditated warfare tactics. The planetary grid that nullified our bombardment was a constructed anomaly designed specifically to disrupt our weapons. Their orbital weapons were not standard planetary defense platforms. They were hidden kinetic railguns positioned in debris fields to avoid detection. Their forces did not fight as a desperate species resisting annihilation. They fought as predators who had lured us into their hunting ground. The chamber remained silent as the words settled over the War Council. No one spoke. No one dared challenge the reality of what had occurred. Vekaroth exhaled slowly, his frustration a controlled ember beneath his cold exterior. "And what of the surviving ground forces?" Korvul hesitated, his expression unreadable. "Few remain, High Chancellor. Those who were captured have not yet been recovered. However, we have intercepted fragmented distress calls from some units before their signals were lost." Vekaroth narrowed his eyes. "Play them." Korvul nodded, and a series of audio logs filled the chamber. "Ambushed, systems offline. They knew, we never had a chance. They're hunting us. This isn't a battle, it's... Static cut through the final recording, but the message was clear. The surviving forces were not prisoners of war. They were not engaged in an ongoing struggle. They were being eliminated, one by one. Vekaroth's grip tightened. "Send a recovery fleet to extract them immediately." Korvul's voice did not waver. "We already did." The High Chancellor's eyes flicked toward him, a silent demand for an explanation. Korvul straightened his posture. The fleet arrived at the last known coordinates of our deployed ground forces. The terrain was... unchanged. There were no signs of battle, no debris, no remains of destroyed vehicles, no bodies. Vekaroth's claws dug into the armrest. Then where are they? Korvul's exoskeletal ridges tensed. Gone. No transmissions, no distress signals. The humans left no trace. The War Council chamber grew deathly quiet. The implications were staggering. The Zelvari had never encountered an enemy that operated this way. Conquered species fought desperately, recklessly. They left wreckage, bodies, evidence of their struggle. But the humans had erased every trace of their victory. Vekaroth leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "Are you suggesting they were taken?" Korval exhaled. "I am suggesting, High Chancellor, that whatever fate befell them, the humans did not intend for us to know." The realization sent a slow ripple of unease through the chamber. A warrior empire like the Zelvari prided itself on understanding war. They had dissected every battle tactic, every species they had encountered, and integrated their knowledge into their military doctrine. But now, for the first time, they were faced with an opponent whose warfare defied comprehension. The humans had lured them in. They had controlled the battlefield before the first shot was fired. They had dismantled the Dominion's forces, not with superior numbers or overwhelming firepower, but with something far more terrifying: strategy, precision, merciless efficiency. Vekaroth stood, his imposing frame casting a long shadow across the war table. His golden eyes burned with something darker than rage. "We will not allow this humiliation to stand." Korvul inclined his head. "What are your orders, High Chancellor?" Vekaroth's voice was steel. "We will not strike blindly. We will not let emotion dictate our next move. We will learn everything about them. We will understand what makes them strong, and when we return, we will not just crush their armies, we will dismantle their very way of war." He turned, his posture unyielding. "Begin preparations. The next time we face humanity, we will not underestimate them." Korvul hesitated, his voice quieter. "And if we cannot understand them, High Chancellor?" Vekaroth's expression did not change. "Then we will ensure the rest of the galaxy fears them as much as we do." The command bridge of the Dominion's wrath was silent. Not the kind of silence that followed an overwhelming victory, nor the disciplined stillness of a fleet preparing for war. It was the silence of uncertainty, of minds too shaken to speak, of a realization so immense that none dared acknowledge it aloud. High Chancellor Vekaroth stood at the center of the chamber, his golden eyes fixed on the shifting tactical projections before him. The remnants of his once proud fleet drifted in the depths of space, licking their wounds, recovering from the devastation they had suffered at the hands of humanity. No one had spoken since his final order. His command had been clear: learn everything about the enemy. But now, as the surviving fleet remained adrift in the void, the question lingered like a specter in the minds of his war council. Was there anything left to learn? Korvul approached, his steps slow, cautious, as if afraid to disturb the fragile atmosphere. He carried a data slate, its surface dimly pulsing with intercepted human transmissions. "High Chancellor," he said, his voice controlled, though Vekaroth could hear the tension beneath it. "We have analyzed the human communications intercepted during the battle. You should see this." Vekaroth gestured for him to proceed. The screen flickered, displaying a series of messages exchanged between human commanders during the engagement. Unlike the precision of Zelvari fleet coordination, these messages were casual, almost relaxed. Enemy fleets repositioning. They still don't know what hit them. Railgun stations. Confirm another direct hit. Recommend holding back final barrage until we confirm their retreat trajectory. Understood. Let them limp away. No need to finish them off. Vekaroth's eyes narrowed. They let us leave. His voice was barely above a whisper, yet it carried through the chamber like a dagger through flesh. Korval's mandibles clicked in agreement. Yes, High Chancellor. They could have annihilated what remained of our fleet. Their orbital weapons had our retreat vector locked. They had ground strike teams ready to deploy. They chose to stand down. Vekirth felt his claws tighten against the metal railing of the tactical console. The weight of the revelation settled deep in his chest, pressing against every instinct he had cultivated over a lifetime of conquest. The humans had not spared them out of mercy. Mercy was for the weak, for the conquered. No, the humans had calculated this decision. They had chosen to let the Dominion survive, knowing that the survivors would return to their empire with the truth. It was a warning. Vekroth turned away from the display, his mind already racing ahead. "They want us to spread fear," he muttered. Corvul nodded. "It is the most effective way to destabilize an empire. Fear does not destroy fleets. It unravels nations from within." Vekroth exhaled slowly, his rage now a cold and controlled force. He would not allow himself to fall into the trap the humans had laid. The Dominion had been wounded, humiliated, forced to retreat, but it was not broken. He would not allow it to be broken. He had built this empire from the ashes of lesser civilizations, and he would not allow it to crumble because of a single failure. He turned to the War Council, his gaze sweeping over each officer in the chamber. "We will not be the messengers of human superiority," he declared. "We will not return to our people in fear. We will rebuild, we will adapt, and we will strike again." Corvul hesitated before responding. "High Chancellor, if we do not acknowledge what we faced, if we dismiss it, then we risk making the same mistakes." Vekroth's golden eyes met his second-in-command's. There was no anger in his gaze, no frustration, only a deadly, calculating certainty. "Then we do not make mistakes," he said. "We learn. And we change the nature of the war." Corvul nodded, but there was something unreadable in his expression. He did not argue, but he also did not immediately affirm the order. Vekroth turned back to the tactical display. The humans had left them alive for a reason. They had manipulated the entire battle to ensure the message would spread, to ensure that every Shelvari soldier, every fleet officer, would whisper in hushed tones about the monsters that lurked on that blue planet. But fear could be a weapon for both sides. If the Dominion could not break humanity in open war, then war itself would have to change. He straightened his posture. "We return to the homeworld. We will not speak of defeat. We will not spread fear. We will rebuild our fleet, expand our intelligence networks, and learn from our failure. And when we return to that world," he let the words hang for a moment before finishing, his voice low, unyielding, "we will ensure there is nothing left to fear." Corvul inclined his head but said nothing. His silence spoke volumes. He had seen the truth as well as Vekroth had, though neither of them would speak it aloud. The Dominion had always believed itself the most advanced military force in the galaxy, the ultimate apex of warfare. But now they had seen something else, something they did not fully understand, something that made the concept of victory itself seem fragile. The humans had not fought for survival. They had fought like hunters, and they had let their prey escape, knowing that it would return with the knowledge of its own insignificance. The fleet drifted toward the edge of the system, leaving the battlefield behind. In the distance, Earth remained unchanged, floating silently against the black of space. As the Dominion's wrath activated its jump drive, the final human transmission still lingered on the display. "Is that all?" Vekroth closed his eyes as the ship lurched into hyperspace. The answer, whether he wanted to admit it or not, was no. It was not all. It was only the beginning.